Hello and welcome to the Pondering Papaya podcast for your review of the 2024 Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix. It was a case of so close and yet so far for McLaren as Lando Norris just missed out on catching Max Verstappen in Imola. Joining me to dissect all of the action is managing editor of the Woman in a Man's Race magazine, Kimberly Wiley, and Total Motorsport F1 journalist Adam Dickinson. So let's get straight into it. So joining me now is Adam and Kimberly. First of all, huge thanks to both of you for joining me this evening. Adam, how are you doing? How was the race for you?
Yeah, good. Until Lando started honing in at the end, then it wasn't. It felt like a quite quiet afternoon after the excitement of Miami, but then it just completely flipped on its head. I was doing the report for it, and it was one where I just had to completely rewrite everything with about 10 laps to go, because I was like, the Verstappen eases to victory line isn't going to work anymore. So very thankful for Lando for rescuing a narrative from the race.
Oh God, as am I. I mean, like you said, it was like 75% of the way through. I was thinking, what on earth are we going to talk about? There's been nothing happened. How was this like? I remember looking at it and it was like lap 36. I was like, you must be joking. Like, we've had at least 400 laps, I swear. Like, it's been so dull. Kimberly, how about you? How did you find the race?
Yeah, I like the first lap or two where you're waiting on every pack's all bunched up. You're someone, Imola and safety cars are best friends as well. So you've kind of got that nerve, like, okay, who's going to go? Pit lane start for Alonso. The grid place penalty for Oscar, but, he had a bit of pace in it. So it was like that first lap or two. And then it chilled out and I was like, oh, normal rhythm has resumed after Miami last week. But then, the last 10 or so laps, you're like, oh, hold on a minute here. Mr. No Pace Norris has suddenly found pace 10 seconds after that radio announcement.
Yeah, definitely. Like, especially after, I don't know if anyone saw the sprint race of F2 on the Saturday, but that was just chaos. And I was like, if we get anything like that, it'll be fine. But obviously, everyone was quite well behaved. There was no incidents and no safety car, in fact. This was a point that I enjoyed on the Sky commentary, that they kept saying there's 100% probability of a safety car. And I was like, that's not how probabilities work. That doesn't make any sense, but it didn't happen. I think he meant to say like 100% record of safety cars, but we didn't have them. Let's go into the race then. Obviously, we'll start with Lando. That's probably the best place to start. Qualified P2, ended the race P2. In fact, only the top three ended in the same place they started with. Everyone else was up and down the grid. Obviously, you got the P2 due to Oscar getting a grid penalty, but we'll touch on that a little bit later. But yeah, pretty much as both of you said, really, sort of quite a slow start, quite a steady start, avoided any incidents, avoided the charging Ferraris. And I think everyone sort of thought he's going to finish comfortably P2 here. And then sort of, like you said, Adam, like, he came in very late, had a very late charge, and suddenly he was chasing Max. I mean, we can talk a little bit about the whole race, but it's probably best to sort of focus on the last final bit. Like, what did you make of that incident? Like, not incident, that sort of sequence of events where, like you said, he's getting closer and closer.
Yeah, I mean, because the most surprising thing was it wasn't straight after the pit stop either. I went back and tracked it on the repeat after the race, and it actually went out to about 6.5 seconds, and then it kind of went out to that within about 10 laps, and was just getting bigger every lap, and then hung around that for a long time. And he was under pressure from Leclerc for a bit, and then like the graphic goes away showing the gap to Leclerc, and suddenly it's 5 seconds, and then it's just like every time you look up and look at the graphic, then it was like another half second coming off. So it was incredible to just see it go so quickly. Like with Verstappen, you're very used to him holding that gap of about 5 seconds, 6 seconds. We've seen it a lot over the last 2 seasons, and if it drops half a second here or there, then he'll just respond the next lap and push it back out again. So for it to have those huge drops lap after lap after lap, it's just something I can't remember the last time we really saw, especially given that they were on the same strategy pretty much. So yeah, I think it was just surprise at it. Oh, it's keeping going down, surely it's going to stop now. Oh no, it's gone again. So, and then I did worry that it would slow, obviously, once he got into the dirty air, but it just felt like, I think he had 10 laps to go when he was within 2 seconds, and it really felt like he'd be able to get get a chance at an overtake. And I think it was just the mistake in, I think, the first sector of the penultimate lap that then cost him the chance at DRS going on to the final lap. And that was really, it's a pretty flawless run in from both drivers, to be honest. And that was, in the end, it was a very, very small error, but that was just what did it in the end. That meant it would have just been so good to see an attempt at an overtake, see the cars go side by side. And it was a shame that we didn't get that. But like I say, it was so much more exciting than we thought it would be with, about 40 laps in.
Yeah, he saved the race very much. And you're right, like I mean, I suppose when you have these drivers are so good, it's such fine margins. And I think there was a few times where Lando almost saved it, really, didn't it? There was a few times where he had a snap of oversteer, kept it on the track, and so obviously I think he finished within 0.7 seconds, which is Max Verstappen's smallest winning margin so far this year. I mean, you look at the other winning margins, they're about 20 seconds. So it was a big difference. And like I said, he didn't eventually catch him. Kimberly, do you think if we had maybe 1-2 more laps, do you think he was going to catch him and overtake him? Or do you think that was just Max being like, okay, you can stay there. You've come enough, but now you've got to stay behind me. Thank you.
I think it's so hard because he was mentioning the big thing was the tyres, and I think they were kind of starting to drop off. So would Lando, if there had been another lap or two, would Lando have had enough life left in his tyres to catch up? Because then was it Max's tyres dying out that was allowing that gap to close as well? But yeah, I think it kind of goes back to what the post-race interview last week after Miami, where they were like, it's all ifs and buts at this point. But I do think there was probably a tyre differential that was playing into there. So I think Max realised Lando was coming for him and had to try gun it through his tyres, which worked for a little bit, and then they started dying off, which then allowed Lando to keep coming up. But I do think even another half lap, he would have been on him for that side-to-side action, because he's the closest thing to competition Max has had this year so far. I mean, that's 3 shared podiums out of the last 3 races, so he's coming for him.
Yeah, definitely. You're right to mention that. He's on a great run. Like you said, the last three races, he's been on the podium. And yeah, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I don't think we've ever had like an on-track battle between Norris and Verstappen yet. I mean, obviously we talk about them being good friends, but it would have been interesting to see them sort of, like you said, get a little bit closer, sort of maybe have a bit of a battle, see if that friendship is tested under the weight of racing. It would have been very interesting to see. And also just a quick mention of Max Verstappen's bizarre way to spend time off. I don't know if anyone saw this, but he basically left the track and then went and did a virtual racing event, woke up the next morning, did some more, and then his team managed to win the race while he was racing. So he's a double winner within the space of about an hour. But yeah, very impressive. So let's talk about the tyres a little bit, because I think you're right that that was essentially what won the race, isn't it, for Verstappen? And this is probably a sign of how dull the race was, that we're talking about how tyres saved it. But Lando pitted into lap 22, started on the mediums. Pretty much everyone started on the mediums. There were a few hards. I don't think there were any softs to start with. But yeah, then onto the hard. Quite a quick stop, 2.5 seconds. But it ultimately put him behind Perez. And I think Perez won't get a lot of plaudits for what he did and sort of his race weekend. I mean, I think it was 9th he finished, which isn't a great one for a Red Bull, but he was quite crucial to Verstappen's victory, wasn't he? Like, he kept both Norris and then Leclerc behind. Like, Adam, do you think if Norris, let's say Perez didn't exist, say if Norris came out to free air, do you think he would have caught Max earlier and potentially had a run at winning the race? Is easy for me to say.
I think was it only one lap that he was behind him, and then he got passed on the straight. So I don't know. I think it might have been one that he managed to have an attempt at overtaking Verstappen, but I think we've seen with Max all the way through that you need to be, it generally takes a few attempts. You need to really size him up, and it's rare that someone gets past on the first attempt. So I think it's possible, but probably on balance probability, I'd say more often than not, it wouldn't. It maybe would have given us an even more exciting last couple of laps, but I'd probably think Verstappen would have just about held on. But like we said, we've not really seen this battle on track, so it's hard to judge that.
Yeah, it would have been really interesting. Listening to Lando's post-race comments, he's sort of saying similar to what we were saying, really, that it was close, but he doesn't know if he would have caught Max. And I think this is probably a great example of what many spoke about last week, is sort of the fine margins in F1, because obviously a lot of people said, oh, Lando only won because of the safety car, blah, blah, blah. But this sort of shows how he was on the other side of didn't get the rub of the green, and sort of had a few, not issues, but sort of just wasn't his time, really. Still a great race. Obviously, P2, as we mentioned, sort of, if we move on to if I look at the standings now, so yeah, comfortably in P4, chasing down Sergio Perez somehow. I don't know how that's happened. Like, I looked at the standings after this and I was like, A, how is Charles Leclerc second? How has this happened? B, how is Sergio Perez third? And how is Lando so close? So, like, it's incredibly tight in the second, third, and fourth. So, Leclerc, obviously, as I mentioned, on 113, Perez on 107, and Norris on 101. Like, Kimberly, as we look at it now, there's a lot of races left to go. There's a lot of season left to go, but obviously we all think P1's probably still out of the question. But do you think Lando is as good as any to get that P2 spot in the driver's standings?
I think it could be. I mean, looking back last season, obviously the calendar's been rearranged slightly, but it was after Miami, Checo real hit on hard times. So is he going to stay P3 based on last year? Potentially not. He could start hitting a slippery slope. But that being said, we've got a couple of street tracks coming up. But I believe Charles is on the same number of podiums as Lando this season. So I think that's going to be where the battles are, especially with the upgrades that are coming across both car packages. I think it could be a tight shout down to the kind of final couple of races between them, just kind of flip-flopping who's where. I think we'll see those two a lot in second and third. But yeah, I think it would be good to see Lando up in P2.
Yeah, you're right to mention the upgrades. Obviously, this is the first European race of the season. And if you're not familiar with F1, this tends to be the time when a lot of people being upgraded because it's just logistically easier. It's much closer to your home base. Obviously, McLaren were a little bit different this year because they bought a lot of upgrades to Norris's car, in particular for Miami, just because they were ready early. But Piastri had about half of them, and then he got the full upgrade package in Imola. Whereas Ferrari sort of famously brought quite a big upgrade package to this race, and ultimately they finished behind Norris, and then Sainz has finished behind Piastri. Adam, how much of a statement do you think that is that Ferrari, in front of the home crowd, bought this big upgrade package, and yet still Lando was very much quicker than Charles, wasn't he? He was down the road by a long way. Like, is that a big statement of where McLaren are in the pecking order?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, obviously it depends then if Ferrari come out and they're a half second quicker next time in Monaco and going forward, then it, how important is it? But I do think, particularly with it being the start of the European season, one of Ferrari's many home races, then to do that in front of the grandstands when there was, so much on the line for Ferrari to make a statement of their own, for McLaren to do that and, like you say, stay ahead with both drivers ahead of at least one Ferrari driver, then I think that's it's certainly it's not just a kind of whoever upgrades last wins. It's more than that, and it is, with the battle for the championship, it could be something like, Mercedes come with a mega upgrade at Silverstone, and then they're the second best team for the second half of the season, and it all changes. Like with a 24 race calendar now, we're not even a third of the way through, which is just bonkers. Mm-hmm. So it's such a long marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah, lots of ebbs and flows to come still, I'm sure. Kimberly, this may be a harsh question, but I'm going to ask you, is Lando Norris the best driver on the grid not called Max Verstappen currently?
Thanks for the difficult questions.
You're welcome.
I think that's probably a subjective point of view. The last couple of races, most likely, yeah, he's been the best driver on track at that moment. But I reckon that could change because there's different factors in that. I think Oscar's probably up there, but also you have to remember, and I always forget this, it's only his second season. He's still got a lot of experience and things to pick up. So does that play into it? Again, we've talked on it briefly there. Lando had the full upgrades last week. So he's already had another chance to get to grips with all those upgrades and things. So at this moment in time, yes. If you look at the driver's standings, no. So yeah, it's a really difficult one depending on your point of view. But I think this season he has the potential to be the best driver not called Max Verstappen.
Mm-hmm. I do think this, this race with them just basically in a league of their own is reminiscent of 2021, where it would just be Verstappen and Hamilton in their own league and then everyone else like 10, 15 seconds behind at the minimum. I think it does. This is the first time that it's really felt like that is, we could be seeing that. So I think they're definitely the form drivers. I guess if Hamilton had a fully firing Mercedes under him and Alonso had the same with Aston, then it obviously be even better. But I think right now they are the two form drivers, and hopefully we can just see more of those battles.
I mean, yeah, that'd be very exciting. Everyone would be salivating at the thought of it. Another 2021 after the last couple of years. But yeah, I think you're both right that sort of this is the first time that Verstappen's had any kind of competition, really. And yeah, Kimberly, you touched on Oscar. Perfect time to segue over to him. He's not going to get the headlines as much as Norris did, but he arguably put in just as good as performance. Like, we'll go back to quali. He finished P2 and he got the quickest lap behind Verstappen, obviously. But there was an impeding incident. And I've always sort of had I've been in two minds about the impeding situation because, as we saw with Oscar, sometimes it's completely not the driver's fault. He just doesn't get a warning. I mean, you have to watch Leclerc over the last few years, the amount of impeding penalties he's got because his radio engineer's like doing a Sudoku or something like that and not telling him who's behind him. So yeah, he gets a free place grid penalty. Funny enough, on Kevin Magnussen, who made a quite funny joke that it was nice to be the stewards but not be the one in trouble for once. He said he just want to check in with them, make sure they're all right. But yeah, so yeah, free place grid penalty. So he goes from P2 as he got down to P5, end of the race P4. He pitted a lap later than Lando, same tyre, so onto the hard, from the medium. Slightly quicker stop at 2.3 seconds, but I think that grid penalty was crucial, wasn't it, Kimberly? I'll come to you on this. That he then had to get past both Sainz and Leclerc, and as we saw early on, he really struggled to get by Sainz. Like, there was a lot of time where he would have been staring at that rear wing, that HP branded rear wing of that Ferrari.
Yeah, I think he'd said in his interview with F1 TV afterwards, like, he got off the line so quick, his start was so good, but then he was met with that rear wing and he couldn't go anywhere. But I think also the penalty is really interesting, just kind of jumping back to that. It kind of highlights, even once they go into quali and a lot of the commentators go on, it's on them now, it's on the drivers. Actually, it's still a team sport. And I think it's something a lot of people kind of forget about when there is mix-ups and qualies and mistakes, that actually it's not just the drivers at fault for that. So that was really interesting. And then Hülkenberg, this feels so bad as a Haas fan. Kevin giving on Oscar the penalty, Nico gave Max the toe, which then allowed him to beat Oscar, because without that toe, Oscar was going for a P1. I'm pretty confident on that one. So yeah, I think it was a Saturday to forget for Oscar, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a free case of Red Bull heading to one of Haas's many HQs saying, cheers for that, lads. Yeah, like I said, the penalty is huge. I mean, he said, I knew after qualifying that it was going to be pretty painful, and today definitely proved it. Like, he was, like you said, he got stuck. And I think it's a point you made well, that you can have a great start, but if someone in front of you doesn't, that's going to make your start much worse. So Max might have a great start and he can drive off into the distance, but someone like Piastri is going to get stuck behind the Ferrari very quickly. Adam, if in a hypothetical world he doesn't get that grid pace penalty, does he do better than Lando, or do you think Lando achieved the maximum a McLaren car could have this weekend?
Sorry, can you repeat that? I had to
oh yeah, did you lose me? Sorry. I was supposed to say, if in a hypothetical world, let's say Oscar doesn't get that grid pace penalty, starts second, do you think he gets more out of the car? Do you think he's able to attack Verstappen, or do you think what Norris did was sort of the maximum McLaren could have hoped to achieve this weekend?
I think it would have been difficult, because even though, regardless of launch, he may have got a better launch. Obviously, he got a pretty good one from where he started on the grid, but it's, I think Lando is, over the course of a race, still a more complete driver. I think, obviously, with Piastri and his degradation, he's still not completely on top of that, which is understandable for someone who's done about 30 F1 races. So, but yeah, I think he may. I think his battle probably would have been with Leclerc for the third podium spot, and it would have been really fascinating to see how they went, because obviously he will have lost time behind both Ferraris, but ultimately then did fall off from Leclerc's rear wing a bit. So I think that would have been the main battle. He might have been able to, whether he could have got ahead of Verstappen at the start, and then that could have helped Norris on the first lap, or, with Verstappen held up behind him, that's a different thing. But I think, discounting whether he could have got a better launch, then I'm not sure. I think he's still just a bit on the raw side for that, and like I say, it's understandable. But yeah,
Yeah, definitely understandable that it's actually his first race at Imola because obviously last year got
Oh, yeah.
washed out a few days before. He did have some not qualifying, sorry, testing on the circuit a few months, weeks ago, whatever it was. But obviously, it's not an F1 race; it's a little bit different. So, still a very impressive drive. He said after the race it was very tough, basically impossible to overtake. And I think what was interesting was he said that the DRS zone was a little bit shorter this year, and he wanted to see the circuit change because obviously Imola's a weird circuit. I think a lot of people really enjoy it. Obviously, it's sort of got that history behind it. It's in Italy, which obviously helps it for sort of the fan perspective. But it is sort of like a bigger Monaco, isn't it? It's very hard to overtake. I mean, as we were mentioning, it wasn't a thrilling race, and that's because it's very hard to overtake. Kimberly, what did you make of like his comments about it needing to have a little bit of change? Do you think they should sort of look into that? Because obviously people say that about Monaco all the time, but the problem is you've got old casinos next door to it. I mean, at least with Imola, it's a circuit, so you could have a little bit of change. Do you think they should maybe modernise it a little bit for Formula One the way it is now?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, they made changes to the track this year by making it narrower, which kind of counterintuitive to what we're saying. But also, I think the fact as well, we're as fans saying, that was a little bit boring. There wasn't a lot going on. We're not the people driving the cars at 200-300 kph, and the drivers are also saying, this is really boring because Oscar's not been the only one to come out and say it. So I do think they need to look at what they can do to change it. They kind of realised that with Albert Park, added in a couple more DRS zones. I'm not too sure where they could put them in around Imola, but I do think they need to look at it for future-proofing the races. If we want to stay on top and keep circuits at the core of F1, they need to find a way to come up with a modern era and the modern cars that are wider and more hard-bearing.
Yeah, you're right. I think making it narrow was always a bit of a weird decision, considering these F1 cars are essentially like two vans strapped next to each other. How wide they are these days. Let's look at sort of Piastri's season the whole. Really, like he's sixth in the standings. I've lost my sheet that says how many points he's on. If you bear with me 1 sec,
he's got 53.
Thank you for filling in.
I think Lando's got 101. So
yeah, so Piastri sixth, 53. 40 points behind Carlos Sainz in fifth, and then 9 points ahead of George Russell in seventh. Obviously, as you mentioned, Lando's got quite a big gap now, almost double what Piastri's got. Adam, do you think Lando's been twice as good as Piastri this year, or do you think Piastri's just been quite unlucky with situations like a grid penalty and stuff like that?
Yeah, I think it's difficult because, like you said, I definitely don't think Lando's twice as good as Piastri. But at the same time, with Sainz ahead, he's won a race and was particularly strong when he was competing at the start of the season. And wasn't off the podium for the first 4 races or 3 races that he competed in, including a win. So, yeah, I think he doesn't deserve to be in the kind of tied to the Mercedes and Alonso pack, but. Yeah, I think he maybe deserves some more points and maybe a podium. But at the same time, I think in terms of his position in the championship, then I think it's difficult to put him above Sainz or Lando, like I say. But yeah, it's just a few times. It's not. It's just kind of he's not got the brakes, like with qualifying. It was a McLaren error. It wasn't his error, but. It's just stuff like that has counted against him. So, yeah, it must be frustrating, but those things come and go. That he'll benefit from it later down the line, I'm sure.
Yeah, definitely very small margin, especially like this year in particular. Like you've got 3 teams who are operating very much close to the maximum they can possibly get. So even a small thing like that can really set you off. Really, let's look at McLaren in general. Though I sort of touched it a little bit, talk about Ferrari's upgrades. So I think everyone would say before Miami, we had sort of a very clear ranking. So it would have been Red Bull, Ferrari together, and then McLaren sort of on their own in like a little no man's land, and then Mercedes, Aston Martin, and then again another big gap to the rest of the team, the rest of the grid. Sorry, Kimberly, are McLaren comfortably the second best team now, or am I getting overexcited because it's been 2 races where they've done quite well? And I should probably wait till Monaco, where they'll probably get 5th and 6th.
I mean, I think we're probably good to have optimism at this point. Like we kind of seen it towards the tail end of last season after the kind of upgrades and that came from Silverstone. They really started taking off, but it's almost like a quiet optimism that should be in us. Because I don't know if this just comes from me being Scottish, but I'm like I don't want to shout about it because if I shout about it, it'll go wrong. So I'm just like trying to pretend it's not that good, and then when it is really good, I'll be like, oh, I know this is going to happen. But yeah, I do think they're probably close to pipping Ferrari to it at the moment, especially over last weekend and this weekend. You know, Oscar's sitting at the top of the drivers that haven't been on the podium yet. Everyone else above him has been there. So I think that also kind of reflects that the fact that there's both their drivers are up there and they've not been on the podium. We're getting there. And yeah.
Yeah, I think Lando Norris must have some Scottish blood in him as well, then, because he's also very pessimistic when it comes to anything about predictions. I remember in the press conference before the weekend, he was asked, "Oh, where do you think McLaren in the order?" He just said third straight away. We're third. But after the race, he was a little bit more optimistic. He said, "Yeah, I think we're at a point now where we can happily say we're now in the position of Ferrari and Red Bull. So it's what we've got to get used to." And he was basically saying they're doing the same stuff. Their teams operating the same way. It's just now they're fighting for podiums. Whereas this time last year, they were fighting just to stay on the track, really, at times. that's how bad it was. So let's sort of look at the grid in general, really. That's sort of where McLaren are. In terms of the standings, McLaren are third. Still quite a big gap to Ferrari up ahead. So McLaren on 124, Ferrari on 187, and then Red Bull a little bit out in front now at 239. McLaren actually being the team to get the most points this weekend, despite not winning the race, because obviously Perez didn't have a great weekend out. We mentioned him a little bit. But there's a big old gap now between McLaren and Mercedes below. I mean, as it is with Piastri and Norris, really, like it's almost double with Mercedes on 64, again having a difficult weekend. Do we think, Adam, that this is going to be how it is for the rest of the year? Like we've mentioned, these three can sort of swap positions. You mentioned maybe a little bit about Mercedes having a big upgrade. Is that something you think is going to happen? Could Aston Martin sort of come back from their slow start to the year, or do you think these three are definitely a step ahead of everyone else now?
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't say this is going to be the status quo for the rest of the season. I think it's really, there's just so, between now and the summer break, and then between the summer break and the start of the Americas leg, and then the Americas leg can be a different thing. We like how Aston Martin, kind of went really down and then came back in like the very last few races of last season. And I think it is still, there's such a difference that can be made, and it is still relatively tight. But right now, compared to the start of the season where we didn't really know where McLaren were between the kind of behind Red Bull pack of Aston Martin, Mercedes and Ferrari, then there is absolutely a separation there right now. McLaren are on the right side of it. And yeah, I think particularly at Monaco next week, I'll be surprised if it's any different. I think it will be these three, and then it's then, like I say, up to the summer break, then it's whether anyone can bring an upgrade forward. Because this time last season, if we said Norris is going to be on the podium at Silverstone, then we would have laughed. It's so much can change. And yeah, I think it's, for McLaren, it's just they've just got to be so pleased with where they are right now, compared everything that's gone in the relatively short-term history and longer-term history back to the 2010s. Then it's just such a fantastic position that they've built themselves up into, to be even talked about as potentially the second fastest team. And I think they do have the edge on Ferrari, at least right now. But yeah, it's been quite an achievement.
Yeah, definitely. I don't have the stats with me, but I'm sure this is their best start to a year, probably since Hamilton was driving for them. Like, definitely, it's been a long time since they've started as well as this. Let's have a look around the grid, then we can sort of leave McLaren behind, really. Like, was there, Kimberly, for you, was there any team? I mean, you mentioned you're a Haas fan. We can talk about them. P11 and P12. I think Magnussen did surprisingly well. Like, for a guy very much under the spotlight, a lot of the pre-race talk was about, is he going to be banned for Monaco? Had a clean race and had quite a good one in the end, didn't he?
Yeah, definitely. It was a squeaky bum time race. Let's put it bluntly. You're always like, please don't take anybody out again. But yeah, I think it is. I think that's kind of a big thing I've noticed with some of the mid-pack teams now this season. They seem to have brought a lot a bit earlier. So like last season, we're looking at Haas. We loved 0 points for a while, unfortunately. But we came into this season really off the bat, kind of V-carb as well, working on it. Alpine kind of gone the opposite way. But I do think the kind of mid-pack of the grid, when we're kind of looking from about 8th to 15th, there's been a lot of battles in there, especially today, despite the lack of opportunities to overtake. There was some nice stuff going on back there, which ultimately ends up impacting, a lot of them were talking about lapped cars getting in the way. which is obviously a big issue again with circuits like Imola that need a bit more modernising.
Yeah, definitely. I think a few of the front runners were a bit annoyed. I'm afraid it's going to be squeaky bum time for a long time. I just checked, and Magnussen's first penalties that get erased are in March next year. So it's going to be a long year of Ao Komatsu sort of gritted teeth on the side of the track. We can sort of touch a little bit on Albon. Obviously, he sort of gets linked in with sort of the Norris group. Really, a horror race from start to finish. Really, like he signed a new deal, sort of wanted to come show what he's made of, maybe celebrate a little bit, and pretty much everything that could go wrong went wrong. So he pitted in lap, I've lost it, but early on he was one of the few, I think it was lap 9 he pitted, and essentially they didn't put the wheel on properly, which is like pit stop 101, make sure the wheel is attached to the car. So he went out, did a lap, obviously came back in, had it changed, but then the FIA take a pretty dim view for any of these kind of situations and say they gave him a stop and go penalty. He had a few more pits. I've lost track of how many pit stops he had, and then eventually retired in lap 51. Adam, what did you make of that? I mean, that's just a disaster from start to finish, isn't it?
It's a great race to have after you've signed your contract extension, not before.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we know Albon's a class act, but it's, I think it's just occasionally you will have these, and I guess fortunately for him and maybe luckily for Logan, it could have been a real opportunity for, if Logan had put in a headline result, then that could have been a real statement, and that didn't happen. But yeah, I guess if you're gonna have several pieces of bad luck, then it's better to have them all in one race and just get it over and done with. Maybe that's the most positive spin I can put on Albon's race, really, because I can't remember where he qualified off the top of my head, but he did make Q2, so there was still that positive from it, and yeah, I think you've just got to write this off. And the good news is, I think sports people always say it's good to be able to have a chance to redeem yourself as soon as possible, and he gets that in a week's time. So he doesn't have to wait long.
Yeah, he definitely right. Another man who I presume wants to write it off pretty much as soon as he gets home is going to be Fernando Alonso. I think he even said yesterday, I'm just looking forward to Monaco now. So they essentially did a long testing session for him, didn't they, after his rare mistake in Q1 that obviously sent him out. Let's finish off a very small preview of Monaco. Kimberly, is it going to be a circuit that suits the McLaren car? I mean, I've been saying this all year. Like, I always say, like, no, it's the medium and high speed circuits. They're not going to be very good here, and then they go and be very good all the time. Early predictions for Monaco. I mean, it's obviously all about that Saturday. Do you think McLaren could do similar to what they've done here?
Yeah, I think the car seems to be cornering a bit better, even in the slower corners this time round. You kind of seen it when the tyre deg was coming into play, when they couldn't just hit the high speed corners as quick as they would have, which again is pretty key for Monaco, because if you go full flat around some of that, that's not ending well for you. So I do think they have a solid chance. I'd be surprised if we see them kind of any lower than the third row. But again, I reckon good chance of finishing kind of that P2-3 where they were for Imola.
Yeah, it'd be a fascinating Saturday for sure. Adam, what about you? What's your early predictions for Monaco?
Yeah, I think again it's going to be a battle with that top three teams. I think potentially Mercedes may be able to spring a slight surprise. They only have to focus on one end of the setup in terms of low speed corners, really. So I think that might benefit them a bit. And once they get in front, it's Monaco's always hard to overtake. But I think principally, yeah, I know it's always the thing with Leclerc at Monaco, and it's his home race, and then it never ever goes to plan. But I do just think he's such a Mr. Saturday. He's so his qualifying record is so fantastic. I can see him, if he can put it all together, then it's maybe if Ferrari are behind on race pace behind McLaren, then this is maybe his best chance on current form to finish ahead of both of them. But yeah, you've got to think that McLaren will be the most confident team behind Red Bull going into the weekend, and who knows, maybe they'll even challenge Red Bull as well. But yeah, I don't after I bought in so much to Ferrari hype on the Friday, I don't want to get burnt again. But
I mean, yeah, it's going to be interesting what part of Leclerc is stronger, Mr. Saturday or the Monaco curse. We shall see over the next few days and so. As obviously Monaco, like I said, we'll be back on Thursday for that. But yeah, in the meantime, a huge thanks to both of you for joining me this evening. I mean, we made it through a less than exciting race. There was a good final 10 laps, but the rest of it was quite dull. So it's over. We can move on to. I mean, I'm saying that it's Monaco next week. It might not be any different, but we can live in hope. Anyway, thanks again, huge for both of you. I'll put in all your links and stuff in the description below, so you can go check them out as well. But yeah, thanks for giving up your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So there you have it. There's your review of the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix, as Lando Norris just misses out on making it back-to-back wins. We're going to be back on Thursday morning for a full preview of the Monaco Grand Prix, so make sure you're subscribed on your favourite podcast platform, give us a rating while you're at it, and you can also follow us on socials at Pondering Papaya. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you Thursday.